Hi, my name is Sam Woods. I'm a tour leader for tropical birding, and today this virtual tour is going to be focusing on Sulawesi and Halmahera, birding the edge of Wallace's Line. This is a tour that's based in Indonesia, and it's based on two main islands of Sulawesi and Halmahera. Indonesia can be a daunting place to try and choose to do a tour. It has over 450 endemic bird species, making it the number one country in the world for the endemic birds. But it's comprised of 17,000 islands, 5 of which are kind of main islands. So it's kind of difficult to know where to go because they're all spread out, and it's a big area to cover. So you can't do Indonesia all on one trip unless you've got several months at your disposal. For me, my idea, if you're ever going to do one Indonesia trip, or you're on your first Indonesia trip, without question the best trip to do is this one, the combination of Sulawesi and Halmahera. I'm indicating where they are here. The reason for that is the high number of endemics you'll get on that trip. So Sulawesi alone, which is just a bit bigger than the size of Florida, has about 80 species endemic to its own island. And then the Moluccas have even more than that. So on this tour, which is a 21-day tour if you take the 2-week main tour on Sulawesi and then the 7-day extension on Halmahera, we typically get 120 to 130 regional endemics on that trip. And that means that essentially, if you've never been to the region before, those at least will be lifers for you, along with several others, I'm sure. To talk about this area without mentioning Alfred Russel Wallace would be a bit of a crime. He was the co-founder of the theory of evolution by natural selection. Charles Darwin's best known for this, but he actually also independently came up with it and actually co-wrote it with Darwin. He actually wrote to Darwin about this, and then they wrote together on it. But so he's known for that, but also of importance is he's also known as a sort of grandfather of biogeography, kind of one of the founders of that. And that's why I'm taking to this slide. So that green area there, which is where we'll be on this tour, and Sulawesi and Halmahera Islands are highlighted there, is now an area they call Wallacea, after Alfred Russel Wallace. He came up with this idea of this line, which I'm going to indicate here, Wallace Line. And his idea with this line is he noticed that the birds on one side of the line were different from the birds on the other side, with his idea being that going east of that line, you'll get into Australasian fauna, and west of it, it's Oriental. Now that idea has been expanded somewhat, so now that whole region in green is considered a zone of transition called Wallacea, a zone of transition between the Oriental region and the Australasian region. And we'll see that on this trip, the influences of both those types of regions on this area. And that's what makes it interesting. You get sort of some Southeast Asian classic birds and families, and then you get some Australasian things creeping in. So it's a very interesting mix. And the Weber line there, which is the tipping point between these avifaunas, we actually crossed that on the trip. So I'm just highlighting it there. So if you notice, Sulawesi is here and Halmahera is here. So when we cross that line, we actually see some notable differences in what we're seeing on this trip, which makes it interesting. It's kind of like a tour within a tour, if you like. This is one of those differences. So in Asia, in the Oriental region, primates are the prominent mammals there. And they occur on Sulawesi. Sulawesi has a number of endemic ones, which are a big draw of this trip, actually. But once we get to Halmahera, there are no more primates. So once we've moved that far east, we've gone across Weber's line. It's all marsupials and nothing else. This is an ornate cuscus on the left. So another interesting point about bird families here, we have the woodpeckers on the left. On Sulawesi, there's only just a couple of woodpecker species. They're endemic. This is the ashy woodpecker. But by the time we've crossed that line, crossed Weber's line over to the Australasian region, if you like, woodpeckers no longer exist. They don't exist in any of Australasia. And another thing to point out is I put barbets here because barbets are this interesting group that if you've been to Southeast Asia and been to the Oriental region in general, you'll consider them a characteristic component of it, both vocally and visually. But there are none in Wallacea, so we've already got rid of some characteristic parts of Oriental region by moving into Wallacea. And that goes for things like babblers. There's one babbler on Sulawesi, but when we get to Halmahera, there are no more babblers. And yet in the Oriental region in general, babblers are this huge family, diverse family. And the same goes with bulbuls. There's one on this trip that's native, and yet all over most of the Orient, they're a dominant family. Here's another indicator species when we move from Sulawesi to Halmahera on the extension. These are everywhere. A familiar Australian bird called the Willy Wagtail in the fantail family. They are literally everywhere, very conspicuous on Halmahera, and yet just a short distance away in Sulawesi, there are none of these at all. I should mention the islands are about 950 kilometers apart, about 600 miles. So one of the things that people get really interested in coming to a place like this is because of families. There is one particular family that has motivated many people to come on this tour, since it was decided it was no longer in the Whistler family and in its own family. And I'm going to show you that now. This is the only endemic bird family on Sulawesi, and it's a one species family, only possible to get there. So if you're collecting the world's families, you need to go after this buddy. This is the Hilo Citria. As I say, it used to be thought of as a whistler, but now it's in its own family. So that's a big draw card for people wanting to come to Sulawesi in particular. And families again feature on Halmahera. This is the Moluccan owlet nightjar. A lot of people, if they've not been to Australasia, this will be a new family to them. I was very inspired to look for this bird when I first went there, because the field guide at the time, written by David Bishop, described their calls as maniacal, blood-curdling screams. So I'm going to give you some calls here to judge for yourself. It certainly made me want to see it, and the bird did not disappoint. Okay, and then two big groups that are represented on this tour I wanted to point out are the kingfishers. So this is blue and white kingfisher on Halmahera. This is scaly-breasted kingfisher on Sulawesi. And this is Sulawesi lilac or lilac-cheeked kingfisher, also on Sulawesi. So this tour, typically we get around a dozen species of kingfisher, sometimes up to 16 species of kingfisher. And another big group is the owls. The owls are very prominent on this tour. We normally get 7 or 8 species, the majority of which are endemic. So on the far left, upper left here, we've got the Halmahera bubuk when we're on Halmahera. On the lower left, we've got a rare one called the Minahasa masked owl on Sulawesi. In the middle, and the third big picture, is the Sulawesi scops owl, readily seen on Sulawesi. Then on the upper right, we've got speckled bubuk, also endemic to Sulawesi and easily seen. And then on the lower right, we've got the ochre-bellied bubuk, also readily seen on Sulawesi. So as I say, excellent tour for owls. And this is one of the signature birds of the Sulawesi leg of the trip, the first 2 weeks, the maleo, a kind of megapode, which is a family which lays their eggs in the dirt, and then the warm volcanic soils incubate the eggs for them. So their parenting duties just involve getting pregnant, going together to dig a hole, throwing the eggs in, refilling in the hole, and then they leave the chick to fend for itself. And this is one of the enigmatic species of the trip. People didn't really understand what family this belonged to for a while. It's now considered a thrush, the odd Geomalia. I'd just like to introduce you to my unusual shirt here. There's a traditional batik shirt bought in Sulawesi. It's always with me on my trips. I think it brings me luck. There's a lot of good memories loaded in the shirt, but you may well mock it, and I totally get that. Okay, so the Sulawesi leg of the trip. 14 days long, 2 weeks. We spend a night in South Sulawesi. Then we fly from that, the main city there, Makassar, to the central city of Palu. Spend time around Lorilindu then, and then we fly up to North Sulawesi. So 1 night spent in the south, 5 nights in the center, and then 8 nights on that northern arm known as the Minahasa Peninsula in the North Sulawesi. That's the main sites in South and Central Sulawesi. So the tour starts in Makassar, which is a big city on the island and is well connected to Singapore and Jakarta. We start at Karanta Forest in the south to look for these southern specialties, the black-ringed white-eye and black-headed kingfisher, which is a potential split from green-backed kingfisher that's found in the south. Other birds we often get there include piping crow, knobbed hornbill, Sulawesi hornbill, and sometimes also Sulawesi goshawk too. And there's also a new species of flycatcher called Sulawesi brown or Sulawesi streaked flycatcher that if we're lucky we can find that there. It's our best chance. It was only described a few years ago now. And we usually get our first endemic primate. Remember, the primates are on Sulawesi, but they're not on Halmahera. This is a moor macaque. And then we swiftly move on and fly to Palu in central Sulawesi and then drive to the edge of Lorilindu National Park, which is where we spend the next 4 nights. Lorilindu National Park is a really interesting area because it gives us our best burst of endemics of the trip because we can cover a variety of elevations there. We cover elevations from about 1,000 meters, so about 3,300 feet, up to about 2,000 meters, about 6,600 feet. So we have 3 core areas we bird there: the Sedua Valley, which is between our guest house and the main area of the park, which is Lake Tambing, which I showed you here. And then we also go and do a walk up a high elevation track to get up to the 2,000 meters, which is called the Anaso track, to get some high altitude specialties. So typically in the 3 full days we have there, 2 of them are spent at the lower elevations, which is like Lake Tambing here, birding along the road and taking a few steps into the forest where needed, and also birding the Sedua Valley down below. We also make sure we do some night birding while we're there, because there are 5 species of nightbird possible there. So we look for Sulawesi scops owl, we look for speckled bubuk, we look for eastern grass owl, we also look for Sulawesi mast owl. The final species of owl is a special one, the cinnabar bubuk. That occurs right around Lake Tambing along the road, and that was only described in the 90s, so fairly recently described. And this is probably one of the area's star species, the purple-bearded biota. We can get that in some of the lower areas, but also some of the high areas, so we'll be on red alert for that every day. Mixed flocks in the area, we look for things like fiery-browed myna in those. Blue-fronted blue flycatcher is quite common at the lower elevation, as is yellow-sided flowerpecker, particularly when you get kind of outside of the true forest there. This is often common in the flocks, the island verditer flycatcher. So when we're birding in the lower elevation, we're often looking for mixed flocks, which have things like Sulawesi leaf warbler, a variety of white eyes, this bird, Malia. So there's a lot of endemic species we get very quickly just by picking up these mixed flocks on our first morning. And this is also down near the lake, the Sulawesi misermiller, a kind of honey eater. And there's also parrots around there like golden mantled racket-tail and yellow and green lorikeet. This is one of the endemic raptors. This trip's very good for endemic raptors. There's about 8 species possible on this trip. This is the small sparrowhawk. The Sedua Valley, just below the main part of the park, is good to look out for soaring raptors like Sulawesi hawk eagle, Sulawesi serpent eagle, rufous-bellied eagle. And other raptors in this particular park are spot-tailed goshawk and vinous-breasted sparrowhawk too. And then we make sure we do some high elevation birding as well. So this is the middle day of the 3. Some people decide not to do this because it is a steep hike. It takes all day long. It's basically a hike of around 10-kilometer round trip, about 6 miles. So some people opt this out and stay with a local guide around the lower areas. For the upper areas, we're looking for birds like this, the satanic or diabolical nightjar. Those are 2 different names for the same bird. This bird was virtually unknown until about 1996, when it was discovered after decades of not being seen, and now it's a regular feature of every tour. Now they've worked out where it sleeps every day. This is also one of the stars of the upper elevation, is the geomalia, that odd thrush. That was a close one, guys. I almost forgot another high altitude specialty of that Anaso track, the upper part of Lorilindu. Sad to say, if you're after this family, you have to hike for it, the Hilo Citria. Almost a blooper time there. And so that's our time at Lorilindu. We'll have got dozens of endemics, hopefully our first kingfishers, our first owls, nightjars, and a bunch of other stuff like parrots, and maybe the purple bearded beaver. And then we moved back to Palu, that city we flew into, and spend a night there, stopping in some open country on the way back to look for roosting savannah nightjars, little bronze cuckoos, pale-headed munia, and we can sometimes also get there a couple of species of buttonquail, barred buttonquail and red-backed buttonquail. And that rounds up our time in central Sulawesi. So we've now done South Sulawesi briefly and central Sulawesi. And now we head to the north. Sulawesi, we fly out of Palu and fly into the city of Manado, and then go straight to Tankoko, usually getting in a few hours in the first afternoon. We spend 3 nights in Tankoko, and for many people this is their favourite reserve. It's excellent for kingfishers, it's excellent scenery, it's coastal forest which is easy to walk in because there's very little understory, and along the coast we do a trip out to the mangroves where you can see volcanoes and the forest from the boat. And it's also good because you can, just the species that you can get there are these kingfishers, we have pittas there, we have this amazing thrush, and then we have some cool primates too, and then it's also good for owls. So you combine the kingfishers, the owls, pitta, thrush and primates, you've got a pretty special place, and we have a good chance of finding a lot of those. Here's a sign for the reserve with a few intriguing things on it, and here's one of the reasons a lot of people who are not birders visit the reserve, the Gursky's spectral tarsier. This animal is seen on every trip because they know the roost tree, one of which is on the right there, and they roost in groups there, and you can see them by day or night. They're actually not nocturnal, but you can see them during the day too. And this is one of the reasons people visit the park who are not focused on birds. And this is the other reason, the Celebes crested macaque. Celebes is the old name for Sulawesi, the Portuguese name. And there's a couple of habituated troops in the park, and that's another big reason why other tourists come who are not there for the birding. And there's a famous shot on the left of this macaque. This is one that took its own picture, and it's kind of embarrassing because it's taken a better picture than I've ever taken in 6 tours there. So what does that say about me? Anyway, we often, it's not uncommon on this trip to be birding within the troop of macaques. Once we've taken our time taking photographs of them, we get distracted by a bird, and then if we look around us we realise we're still within the troop of macaques birding. So it's a pretty cool experience and pretty unique for any tour that I know. And then of course we have the birds in the park. There's some absolutely stunning birds in this lowland park. We do 3 main areas. We go on forest trails inside the forest, and also a road which is blocked off to vehicles that cuts through the forest. And then we go to a lookout to look for canopy birds like this, the knobbed hornbill. And then we also do a boat trip into the mangroves. So there's 3 sort of core areas. Owls are a big feature there. This is one of the rarest ones of the entire tour, the Minahasa mast owl. We also have a chance at this place, a good chance of Sulawesi scops owl. They might even keep you up in the night. We also look for Sulawesi mast owl there. Speckled bubak also occurs there. So we have a range of owls there we can see. Oh, sorry, an ochre-bellied bubak's a key one there. And this is one of the birds we look for from the lookouts, the purple-winged roller or Sulawesi roller. And this is also a lookout bird, the grosbeak starling or finch-billed miner. We look out for dead limbs. They like to nest in hollows on dead limbs, and they're noisy. There are noisy rattler birds that occur in dozens when you see them, so they kind of tell you they're there. And as I said, it's a good area for both mammals and also for kingfishers. This is perhaps the most difficult of the kingfishers, the Sulawesi dwarf kingfisher. And then we have a really cool mammal on the left, which is a marsupial. So remember, this is the transition zone between the Oriental region and Australasian region, and we have primates in this park, and we also have the bear cuscus. And as I said, kingfishers are a big feature of the tour and a big feature of this park. I have seen 7 species of kingfisher in a day there on several occasions, and the park as a whole, the big area of the park, actually has a species list of 10 kingfishers, which is pretty ridiculous when you think there's only 5 in South America and as a total. This is another one of the star ones, the lilac-cheeked kingfisher. And then we get on to the pitta. This is used to be called red-bellied pitta. It's now been split as Sulawesi pitta. And yeah, this is a really good place to get it. Seems to be getting a bit difficult in recent years, but generally we see it. And if you see it, you tend to see it very well because the local guides have excellent stakeouts for them. And often in the same area, they're both ground-dwelling forest birds. So this is involved in our walks into the forest. This is the red-backed or rusty-backed thrush. For me, one of the best-looking thrushes in the world. And this is a bird we can see. There's like a little stream that runs behind our accommodations. We can sometimes see it there. And if not, we have a go on the mangrove boat trip to see the ruddy kingfisher. This is one of the other owls that I was mentioning, the ochre-bellied bubuk. Even though this looks like it was taken at night, you most often see this at roost sites that are staked out during the day. And this is the easiest of the owl species, the Sulawesi scops owl, very common in the area. So we've done our lookout birding, we've done our forest birding, and then we do a boat trip into the mangroves on this boat you can see here. And this is really principally for another kingfisher, can you believe it? And this is for the great-billed kingfisher, very well named one indeed. We can also get the endemic white-rumped cuckoo shrike on that journey, and the ruddy kingfisher sometimes, and we can get other birds along there too, but it's kind of a main trip for seeing the great-billed kingfisher and the white-rumped cuckoo shrike, two kind of core endemics of the trip. So now we've finished in Tankoko, we move along that northern arm of the Minahasa Peninsula, that spidery arm at the top, and we go quite a long journey. Then it's about a 7-hour trip to a city of Kota Mabagu, where we spend several nights going for a key reserve called Demogabone National Park for 2 full days. On the journey there, we pass through rice paddies where you can see Javan pond herons, sometimes buff-banded rails, and the open habitat there also has lesser kukal too. And barred rail is a fairly common bird on the whole trip. We often see them scoot out onto the road at various points on the trip, so it's a handsome bird and really easy to find at a number of sites. And this is why we make the journey, really. This is for Sulawesi's signature bird, the maleo, this kind of megapode. This is at one site within Demogabone National Park. We do about 3 different spots. One's called Tambun, that's where we look for this bird, and we have other chances of Sulawesi Pitta, and other birds like maroon-chinned fruit dove, which is another key species of the area. And the maleo comes, our best chance of usually seeing it is in the late afternoon, because the pair comes in to lay eggs in the morning, but they'll come in the afternoon and roost in tall trees beside the edge of a clearing where they're going to lay their eggs in the morning. And so the most regular way of finding them is to walk that trail quietly in the late afternoon and try and find these big birds sitting in the trees ready to lay the next morning. And what they do, their eggs are heavily persecuted and heavily treasured because they are big and tasty apparently. So the rangers in this particular area, which is very well protected, they collect the eggs, they dig up the eggs because the eggs are vulnerable but the chicks are not. So they dig up the eggs, put them in protected areas for a few days, let them hatch, and then they release the chicks. The chicks are always fully independent when they're released, when they come out of the hole, even if the eggs were not taken. So it's no harm on the chick because the chicks are ready to go, independent. The adults don't take care of them from the word go when they come out of the hole anyway. So this is a way of stopping them, keeping the eggs safe, and once they're at the chick phase, they're not wanted anymore. So they're only hunted for their eggs. And so you can get involved in actually releasing the chicks, which is pretty cool. Some people have had some really personal experiences with that, which they really treasure. And this is another bird you can get in the area. This is one of the potential Sulawesi endemics. It's a potential split, the spangled drongo, which occurs in Australia. But in Australia, if you've seen it, you'll notice it doesn't have this white beady eye. So it's a potential split for the future. And the same area, we have a chance of the Sulawesi mast owl. I've mentioned this a couple of times before, but it does often take a few tries to get these birds. This was photographed near our hotel in Kota Mabagu, the Sulawesi mast owl. And then we move on from there to a couple of other sites for short periods at the end of our North Sulawesi trip. We go to Gunung Angbang for a rare flycatcher called Matinan flycatcher, and that also gives us an extra shot at the purple-bearded beta, cinnabar bubuk, and also the Sulawesi mast owl if we get there pre-dawn. And then the last site of our North Sulawesi leg is to here, Gunung Merhawu, and this is a viewpoint that you can look out on the crater itself. And we bird the forested slopes just below this, and this is our principal target there, the scaly-breasted kingfisher. We'll have undoubtedly tried for this bird already, but it is a bird that usually takes several sites and multiple tries to get it, and this is the most reliable part of the trip. So we usually try and end the trip by getting this bird near to Manado. And Manado is where we finish up with views like this, to Bunakan National Park. This is a view from our hotel. The hotel has a nice little boardwalk at the back with mangroves, very short, very scenic. This is where this was taken. Sometimes you get shorebirds sitting on these stone kind of posts, things like sand plovers and tattlers. Sometimes you see bulbous petrel flying offshore, and sometimes in the mangroves we find white-rumped cuckoo-shrike, an endemic. And so that rounds up our 2 weeks in Sulawesi Island in Wallacea of Indonesia. And then the extension, a week-long extension, continues on from here when we fly from Manado to the island of Halmahera. Okay, so we've spent a week on Sulawesi, and then we fly from the city of Manado on North Sulawesi to Halmahera. We fly to the north part of the island here and make our way to Tobelo. We spend 1 night on Tobelo, then we go to Wada Resort south of there for 4 nights, during which time we visit this mountain site called Bukit Lemba. Bukit means hill or mountain. And then to end the trip we cross over to Safifi and take a short 30-minute speedboat ride to the island of Ternate, which is got a big city and connections to Singapore and Jakarta, and that's where our international flights leave from. I should mention this is the Spice Islands, the origin of things like cloves, mace and nutmeg, which were a subject of wars in the colonial period with the Dutch, when these spices were more valuable than gold, believe it or not. So the first night we go to Tobelo, and we particularly are on the lookout for this bird, and we go out at night for this. This is a kind of megapode that lays its eggs in the sand, this black volcanic sand. But it's unusual in the megapode family in that it does it at night. All the others do it during the daytime. So we drive and then we take a small boat ride to this deserted beach, which is protected. We go there with the ranger, and offshore we'll see a forested volcano which is inaccessible, and these birds live on that volcano, and then at night they fly during the night onto this sand we're waiting for them on and lay their eggs before then returning to the forest. So they come onto the beach, dig a hole in the sand, lay their eggs, fill it up again, and then fly back to the volcano. And so that's our window of opportunity to see them, because you can't go and see them on their daytime areas. And the chicks hatch out of this, and they're fully independent, and when they hatch, the adults don't have any parenting duties. The chicks themselves immediately fly to that volcano too. They're already able to fly. So it's a pretty incredible story. It's a pretty late night, but hopefully we get the scrub fowl out of it and we're all happy. On the way back, after we dock in with this small boat trip we do, we can often see one of our first owls of the trip, the Moluccan scops owl, and we may also pick up large-tailed niger on the area too. Then the next day we drive south from Tobelo to that Wada Resort where we spend 4 nights, which is a beautiful dive resort. And the journey will take in some endemics like this cream-throated white-eye, or potentially going to be split as Halmahera white-eye. Another one of the widespread endemics we'll look for of the Moluccas is the rufous-bellied triller. We also go through an area of hills where there's some good views of the canopy, where we can pick up things like this white or umbrella cockatoo. And on the roadside wires, we keep a lookout for this kingfisher. The kingfishers and owls do not stop in Halmahera. They continue on. This is the blue and white kingfisher. We have a chance of adding about 4 species of kingfisher on this part of the trip. Here's a sacred kingfisher, one of the more widespread ones. And then we finally arrive at Wada Resort, our base for 4 nights. This is on the edge of Wada Bay, and the trees behind the cabins there, I've had things like ornate cuscus in there, Blythe's hornbill, Moluccan owlet nightjar, Moluccan scops owl. So some good birding right around the resort, and we'll spend our time there sort of birding roads nearby and also make a day trip out to the highlands. And this is another picture of Wada Bay from our day trip out to the highlands. Beautiful place, excellent for diving, but because this isn't the season for diving, they embrace the birding at this time, because we end up bringing in good business for them. They have some excellent local guides. And this is their kind of dream star bird, I guess, the Wallace's Standardwing, or Standardwing bird of paradise, named after Alfred Russel Wallace himself. They have a display area on site. On our first morning, we head out there in the dark and we go and watch them displaying at the site that all the natural history documentary makers go to see them as well. It's the most accessible site of these in the world. Previously you had to do like huge hikes. This is about a 20-minute walk, no big deal, and there's excellent birds on that walk too. And we'll listen to the Wallace's Standardwing, just so this is the sound we hear as we walk through the forest in the dark as we're approaching their display site. So the sound probably gives you the impression this is a very easy bird to see. And indeed, that is the case at the display site. But away from there, we see them very seldom. So we have a very good chance in this trip to see them, but purely because we have a display site that the lodge has not only discovered, but is protecting too. And in the same area, we look for one of the other star birds of the area, the Ivory-breasted Pitta. A lot harder to see like this. Very common by voice, but fantastically elusive. We'll have a lot of battles with that, I'm sure. And this is sort of the logo bird of the lodge we're staying in, the resort, the Blythes or Papuan hornbill, quite common in the area. And remember, on Sulawesi we had knobbed hornbills. This is kind of the replacement once we've got over to Halmahera. And pittas, we've already mentioned the Ivory-breasted Pitta. This is the other one we'll be going after, the North Moluccan or Sultan Sahel Pitta, depending on who's naming it. This is another one of those splits from the red-bellied Pitta, which was split into 16 species in one fatal blow. And then this is one of the harder birds in the area. This is a really good picture of the invisible rail. I'll play you the call, which will give you the impression that you can't possibly miss this. But this is arguably the very hardest bird of the entire tour. I'll hand you over to the invisible rail. So this is likely to be your view of the bird, one of the hardest birds of this trip. And for one day on this our 4-night stay at Wada, we go up into this beautiful area of the highlands called Bukit Lemba. And it's a pretty amazing day. Because it's a private site owned by a private company, we get special access through the resort, and it usually means you're up there alone with very, very little traffic or very few people at all, which is a really cool experience. And these are some of the birds we look for there. On the left we have two of the specialties, the Moluccan king parrot. This is our only chance of the trip because you need that little bit of elevation. And the Halmahera leaf warbler, a potential split from island leaf warbler. The site's also good for raptors. It has Gurney's eagle, this one here on the right, and it also has pygmy eagle. It's our best chance of that, as well as variable goshawk, which is a potential split in the Moluccas. It's also a nice place to see pitcher plants. We also have some of these in Sulawesi, so hopefully at one point of the trip we'll see a pitcher plant or two. And this is another of the specialties at this high elevation site. It's currently considered a subspecies, but a distinctive one, of Rufous fantail, but it's probably going to be split. One of the potential names being given to it is Gilolo fantail. Gilolo is the old name for Halmahera. And here we have more birds we'll look for in the general area around Wada Resort. Blue-capped fruit dove is one of the more common ones. We look for 3 species of fruit dove on this section of the trip, which are specialties. We've got the blue-capped and the grey-headed, which are fairly straightforward. And then we have the scarlet-breasted, which usually takes a bit more frustration and attempts to get it. And this is also one of the rare birds of the area, the purple dollar bird. And as I say, the kingfishers don't stop on Halmahera. We've already seen the blue and white kingfisher usually by this point, but we're also looking for common paradise kingfisher, and we also have a chance for North Moluccan dwarf kingfisher too. And this is another of the specialty kingfishers, the Samba Kingfisher. Usually quite easy to see in this area because they do tend to perch on wires, but actually very difficult over much of its range, even though it's one of these specialties, so we have a good chance of it at Wada. Here's that scarlet-breasted fruit dove I mentioned, along with a couple more Moluccan specialties, the white-naped monarch, and then the white-streaked or Halmahera friarbird, which is a kind of honey-eater, which again sort of betrays your presence in an area that's more Australasian now than Oriental. And here's another bird that's usually fairly vocal and conspicuous to hear on Halmahera, the Moluccan or black-chinned whistler. So this has brought us to the end of the trip. I've given you a bit of a spread here to keep your eyes focused on the screen and hopefully remind you why it's such a cool trip. So to summarize again, these 2 Indonesian islands will get you about 120 to 130 endemics of the region, which will be lifers alone in addition to some others you might get as lifers. And there's some interesting primates, interesting mammals, like the bear cuscus here and the tarsier. Some cool pittas like the Pseudo-Ac pitta, a bird of paradise with the Wallace's Standardwing. You have to come here to get it. Beautiful hornbills like that knobbed hornbill, and then 12 or more kingfishers are likely on the trip, and this is the green backed again, one of the easy ones, believe it or not. So as you can see, I hope you understand I'm waxing lyrical about the place because I really enjoy it. I've done 6 trips there and I cannot wait to get back. I'm wearing this shirt in remembrance of the trip. I really hope you enjoy it, and keep an eye out for other virtual tours I'll be doing. There's Eastern Australia already done, top end of Australia also done, and Costa Rica, and there's a bunch of other virtual tours by other guides. So thank you for supporting this project, and I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully it'll affect your future travel plans. Thank you again.